Smalls. I suppose you don't even know who the babe is either. It's plugged. What? Chewing tobacco?
Tobacco, man.
What do you do with it?
You're killing me, Smalls.
So I hadn't really planned on making a video about this particular subject because, even the source of the rumor has said it is an unverified rumor that he received that DC Comics would no longer be publishing physical comic books starting in June 2021. And I've seen enough of the comments from the viewers asking questions about it, bringing it up, that I figure I probably need to address it here on the channel. Now, the quick and simple answer is no, I don't believe that's actually happening. Now, I've stated here on the channel that I do believe DC Comics are deprioritizing the direct market that essentially is served to distribute and get comics to customers since like the 90s. That's probably been the sole provider. Obviously, there is Comixology. Marvel Unlimited has their own digital app. DC sort of does with DC Universe. I don't even think that's out right now. They're waiting to relaunch it. So I do think DC is changing their focus, and they want to prioritize digital YA graphic novels as we've seen growth, in the YA graphic novel, child graphic novel market. And digital is probably it has to be seen as the future of the comic book industry. But to do it in June 2021 would be pretty crazy. And I have a few reasons for believing this. This isn't just because I have faith in DC Comics or I believe in my heart of hearts that that they're not going to stop printing comics. I think eventually they will likely stop printing physical comics. I don't think it's that quick. So the primary reason is, if you think about DC Comics and digital, where do you go for your DC digital comics? Mostly Comixology. DC Universe is up and should be up and running. I believe it's relaunching in the not too distant future. And there's going to be a bigger library, and I believe you're going to get new comics sooner. I believe it's 60 or 90 days after publication, they will actually be on the app. But DC isn't ready for this. They don't even really have the platform. Have they done the marketing? You don't just get markets given to you. You actually have to go out there and you have to earn them. You have to go trial and error. And quite frankly, DC and Marvel have not done that yet for the digital comics market. Yes, they've put minimal effort in there. And DC does have their DC digital first lineup, but does it feel like DC is moving all their eggs into that one basket right now? Absolutely not. They're certainly moving towards that. And, one of the problems, and I'm sure that DC Comics knows that, if I can figure this out, I'm certain they can as well. They should know the markets better than I do. Why is Netflix popular? People collect movies. They like to have their Blu-ray or their DVD collection. And I'm sure there are people out there that still have like a VHS collection. Or maybe they want to put their stuff on, they still have their Laserdiscs and stuff. People like to collect stuff like that. But the reason like a Netflix is popular and accessible and, people all over the world have it is because you don't feel the need to own those movies. You go to that service and you stream a movie and you move on and you know that you don't own it. DC Comics doesn't have that now. You get nothing new. Everything's delayed. Their platform for it right now completely sucks. All digital comic book platforms in the West suck right now. They're not user friendly and they don't perform very well. Like, you need to have a good interface, a good app that works. Something that works on desktop, works on laptops, works on your tablet and works on your phone, that where people have multiple ways that they can consume it. Netflix has that. If you look at Shonen Jump, they have that, and they have a price point. But do you think Shonen Jump just all of a sudden got millions of subscribers worldwide and was able to offer their product for $2 by just abandoning the print market and just going straight to digital? No. You do that over time. You go into the market, you decide, you have your strategy, and by trial and error, you grow it, and you hope you grow your subscriber base. you have a better product that's being offered, and more people come subscribe. Probably $2 price point per month, which is phenomenal. That's an amazing value to be getting new material, that much new material. Plus, you have all the access to the old stuff. Now, DC has access to the old stuff, but even I think DC Universe could be like $6 or $7 for all their old comics, but you're not getting new stuff. In the DC Digital First, it's not like those are going on to they were going on to their DC Universe app, day one. They were trying to sell them individually, like music used to do through iTunes, where they thought they were going to sell their albums digitally. And that didn't turn out that way. Do some people buy their music digitally, buy their singles digitally through the iStore or the iTunes or whatever? Yeah, sure. But most people have like Pandora or all the streaming music apps, because it's a better value for your money. And people don't want to spend anything close to what would be a market price for a comic book in digital form, because you don't own it. So a subscription platform is the future, and certainly DC is changing their subscription platform. They're relaunching DC Universe. You're getting the new comics sooner, but you're not getting them the same day. You're not getting anything really exclusive to that. You're getting access to old stuff. There's no way that DC Comics would be able to just drop all their existing customers, move all their focus over to digital, with no customer base really to speak of there, and just loot. DC Comics might not be selling like gangbusters, but they do make money. Now, do they make a whole lot of money in comparison to some of the other divisions at Warner Media and AT&T? No. That's why everyone's getting cut down, and DC's a part of it. But DC Comics properties are a huge part of the Warner Media strategy. They're very important to Warner Media and AT&T. One of the reasons AT&T, when they bought Warner Media, they could have excluded the DC Comics properties and sold that off, to somebody else. They didn't have to include that into the deal. They had Warner Brothers had structured their lineup to where they could piece things off if somebody didn't want to acquire the whole thing. They acquired the DC Comics stuff for a reason, because the characters are important for their potential long-term growth as far as HBO Max, the movie universe and all that stuff. It's important to them. Now, are DC physical comics really important? Well, not in comparison to that, but you still want to keep producing stories, because that's, the IP farm itself. That's where you get the new stories, or you create the new characters. Do you really want to, screen test a new DC Comics universe movie character on the big screen? What if, what if the character flops? What if the character design's not right? You put it in a print, maybe in cartoons and stuff like that, and see what the reaction is if people like it. So DC Comics still has value, and right now you couldn't just you couldn't cease physical, in the next 6 months, 7 months, and just go all digital. You would alienate the little fan base that's left that are loyal to DC Comics. You would completely alienate them. A lot of them would turn their backs on DC, and they would just go read Marvel, and they would expand their character base. And Marvel would reap the rewards as they're growing their digital platform as well. It feels like Marvel isn't as committed to digital as DC, but DC is completely unprepared right now. And like I said, you don't just get markets. You have to go in there. You have to earn them through trial and error and going in and marketing. When has DC marketed anything for digital comics? Like, have you seen it? I haven't seen it. I read a lot of the articles and press releases because I have a comic book news channel here that I want to deliver you guys the information. But they're certainly not prepared for any of this. And could they even be ready in 7 months? Is the platform ready? No, it's not ready for prime time. They need to get it ready, and they need to get it to where the digital is profitable enough to where they can start delivering same day of, and then you can start expanding digital and kind of moving that way as they continue to deprioritize the direct comic market. I cannot deny that. I am completely convinced and I think most people are at this point, that DC is deprioritizing and they're shifting their focus. But they're not prepared to just drop everything altogether. And there's anecdotal evidence that that's not happening. Sean Gordon Murphy was in Perch did a video, I think it was yesterday or the day before, talking about this very subject. Sean Gordon Murphy, the DC Comics creator, said, "I don't think so. They just signed me up, for an 8-issue deal. Goes out past June. That would be pretty weird for them to be signing me up for work that goes past the date when they're stopping." So it's not just common sense. There's actual evidence that they're doing this. Now, are they trying to cut costs? Obviously, they are. They just had all the layoffs. They had 2 rounds of layoffs. Plus, before that, they got rid of some senior people. And we know that they are trying to cut costs with the creators, where they're bringing on, elevating some lesser known creators, creative talent that's going to cost less. Geoff Johns is going over to Image Comics and publishing one of his books, his books with Gary Frank. But Geoff Johns is also planning on writing a sequel with Jason Fabok and delivering a Batman 3 Joker sequel through DC Comics. And we just learned Geoff Johns and Gary Frank are still delivering their Batman, Earth Zero Volume 3, a graphic novel. So they are still producing stuff that is planned to be distributed past June. So are DC Comics just going to shut it all down and not deliver comics anymore starting in June 2021? Are they only going to go to physical or digital comics and graphic novels? All signs say no. It does not appear that way. I don't know where that I don't know what source. Obviously, Ethan Van Sciver. That's kind of where this all came from. I recently had him on the channel last weekend talking about all of this stuff on Comics Aficionados, and I thought he was a good guest. He had a lot of information. He certainly had some insight as to some of the people and inner workings of DC Comics that certainly I wouldn't have, or any of the other guests have. And I did appreciate him coming on here, but I do believe he's just running with a nothing burger. There's nothing to it. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't pass the smell test. And we have evidence that DC Comics is contracting work past June to be delivered physically. So I don't know. I'm not saying EVS is full of crap. I'm sure he does. He did hear an unverified rumor that was going to be the case, but I shouldn't even be making this video. It's you need more information than what we have to even kind of run with this stuff. But there were enough people in the comments that I felt like I needed to address it. I am going to bring Perch on here, here in a couple seconds and get his thoughts on it as well. But that's what I think. I'm pretty certain that's a no. DC Comics isn't going to stop delivering physical comics starting in June 2021. It sounds ridiculous. They are not ready to enter the digital market like that. They need more time. They need to expand their footprint. They need to market it, and they need to grow that digital audience, and they need a better platform. And it needs to be a subscription model. They need to get away from the individual sales, because that's not going to work. It doesn't work for movies. It doesn't work for music. It's not going to work for comic books. A subscription model is the way, with new content coming in, very regularly, like your Netflix and things like that. So, or your Shonen Jump. Obviously, that's the best example of how to make it work. A very good price point, lots of content. You don't own any of it. You just have access to it via the application or the program, whatever it is, and that's how you get it. Is DC ready to be Shonen Jump for Western comics? Absolutely not. They haven't even started. There's a lot more work that needs to be going into it. So, all right, now I'm going to bring on Perch and see what he has to say. That'll be very short. So, Perch, I'm glad you could give me a couple minutes here today just to kind of talk about the rumors that DC Comics are going to stop publishing comic books or physical comics in June 2021. I just talked about a lot of the reasons. Like, it doesn't pass the smell test for me. It's clear that DC does want to move to a digital strategy, but they don't really have a platform ready. They don't have a market share there, and it's certainly not profitable yet. So it would be way too early to drop what they're doing now and to move over to a new market. We saw Sean Gordon Murphy show up in a comment on, I think, one of your videos saying, I've been signed up for a comic book that's going to be published after June 2021. So we have anecdotal evidence that it's not true.
Yeah.
Plus they would just basically turn off the entire existing fan base that they have right now if they just turned everything physical off and went over to a new market that's completely untested and they haven't figured out yet.
Yeah, no, I mean, as more time goes by, and you and I have both been doing videos, and I think I say this every time, feels like we've been talking about this for years. Which should maybe be an indication to people who keep going back to this rumor. I mean, this has been going on. This rumor has been going on for years. We've heard about the imminent demise and end of DC for a while. And, this is maybe an area where I've tried to be, I don't want to say patient, but I've tried to lay out, here's how you can think about it logically. Here's why this isn't absolutely anything is possible. As we've just seen from 2020, anything can happen, but the odds are very against it. And as you start to read the signs and you start to look at where the business is going, and just the fact that comics take 6 to 9 months to get ready from conception to out the door for the big two, the timeline doesn't make sense. But in the last even 48 hours, I've heard from a large number of people. You mentioned one person who showed up in my comments, but there's been others. There are plenty of deals being signed. There are contracts being done. No, they're not contracts that are going to get changed in the middle. I mean, can you imagine Batcat on issue 7 suddenly changing to digital to complete the 12 issue? That doesn't make much sense. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen next year. I've tried to keep the door open for the various low chances that something like that can happen. I can say very definitively now with people I've spoken to, they're not going to stop publishing next year. They're definitely not.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense. I think you and I are somewhat in agreement that the industry is evolving.
Absolutely.
Digital is the future, but the future is not now.
No, absolutely. And digital, I think, is one part of the future. I don't think it's even the sole future. If you look at Japan, they've got a very robust, healthy digital market. They're still printing comics. They're still making lots of money printing comics. And so I think people too often think of it as, it's one thing or the other. It can't be both. And the reality is a collector's market, as we've heard, as we've talked on streams and other places, they're going to go for print. Collectors like to own. They like to hold something in their hands, and they like print. And there's money coming in. It's not billions of dollars, but it's enough to keep going. And digital is largely a different market in many cases, and it's waiting to be tapped. And the disappointment is that they haven't figured out how to do that properly in the U.S. like they have in other countries. But both things can continue. It's DC definitely wants to expand their money, like everybody should. I mean, I'll be blunt. I have a lot more concerns if I'm talking about the stability of a line for Marvel than DC, to be honest. And I know that flies in the face of everything else that people have said, but I think of the two, DC has a clearer path to what their future looks like than even Marvel. Marvel's making more money, but they've got a much more convoluted world with Disney and with some of the other things going on than DC, in my opinion.
No, they certainly have a lot of things working against them. It's what are we on, like 10 months of shutdowns?
Sure, yeah.
Sounds like we're getting another round of ramp ups and stuff like that. So obviously, nothing is set in stone, but I don't think it's almost like I'm 99.9% certain that right now DC Comics and Warner Media and AT&T are planning for DC Comics to continue publishing physical comic books past June 2021.
Yeah, I'm at this point 100% sure. There's even
more positive. So
I'm positive. It's going to take an asteroid hitting a country for things to stop at this point for them.
Yeah. So obviously I did have Ethan Van Sciver on the Comics Aficionados last weekend. I appreciate him being a guest. I thought he brought a lot of insight as far as some of the inner workings of DC Comics. Obviously he worked here, but he himself called this an unverified rumor.
He did, and I think what's weird about that, because people keep coming to me saying, "Oh, you're arguing with EVS and you're arguing with his point," but I don't know. I mean, he was on the show. We talked around a bit and around this topic. I mean, he was not saying for sure that was happening. He was also, I was in agreement with him that the world is changing and they have different priorities and things are shifting, and that's definitely true. And keep in mind what's businesses continue doesn't always mean it's going to be enjoyable content. Those are two separate topics. It's very possible that the corporation machine kind of continues to pump out comics, and the comics we get are feel like marketing tools and they're less enjoyable. That's absolutely possible. And in fact, you might even argue likely as more corporate involvement happens. So, it all can happen.
Absolutely. So, Perch, thank you for coming on, just giving a couple of minutes. Obviously, I already gave kind of my perspective on it, and we're on the same page. DC Comics is going to continue, but they are evolving.
Yeah, absolutely.